Okay, so we began looking at Mida number 10 and Mida number 11. Mida number 10 is Titen Emes Yakov, to give Emes to Yakov. And Mida number 11 is to give Chesed, to give loving kindness to Avraham. So what do those midos mean vis-a-vis Hashem? So the first issue is, what is the difference between Yakov and Avraham? So the interpretation is that this is not referring to Yakov as a person or Avraham as a person, but it is referring to different aspects of the Jewish people. Now, yesterday we discussed the distinction between Yakov himself has two names, Yakov and Yisrael, and Yakov that refers to heel. The heel refers to the Jewish people when they are in a lowly level, and Yisrael, which is Yaakov triumphing with an angel of God or against an angel of God, refers to the Jewish people at a very exalted level. That's the difference between Yaakov and Yisrael. But for purposes of this pasuk, we have to look at the difference not between Yaakov and Yisrael, but between Yaakov and Avram. So here's what the Ramak says. More or less, it's still going to be, Yaakov refers to the average Jew, but in particular, Yaakov is connected to the Midah of Emes. Right? That's why it says, give Emes to Yaakov. Now, what do we mean by the Midah of Emes? So we have to have a little Cabalistic background. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifests his divine presence in the world through the medium of the 10 spheros. Right? We talked about that a lot. And the 10 spheros are really divided into a 3 and a 7. The 3 are called muchen. They are God's brains, so to speak. They are part of God's internal thought process that is totally beyond us. And that is the formulation of thought, so to speak, in the mind of God. And they are called keser, the crown, Chachma, wisdom, Bina, understanding. In fact, if you remember, structurally, all of these 13 midos of Rachamim are aspects of Keser. The whole Ramak is only discussing the first of these spheres. So we have Keser, Chachma, Bina. Some say Keser is so high that we can't even talk about it. We can only talk about something below Keser, so they have Chachma, Bina, Das, Chabad. But in the official Cabalistic structure, we do not count Das as a sphera, because Das is simply the union and the integration between Chachma and Bina, and therefore we normally talk about the highest 3 as Keser, Chachma, Bina. Okay, but those we don't really deal with. But then we have the lower sphere, right? So the first 3 are called Muchin, Moach, the brains. The lower 7 are called Midos, behavioral and emotional manifestations of God's presence. And of the lower 7, the first 3 of the lower 7, meaning 4, 5, 6, are considered to be the most important. And they are Chesed, loving kindness, Devorah, inner strength, and the third is Tiferes, which is beauty. Chagat, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, often called Gimel Rishonos. So it's interesting, when you see in a Kabbalah Sefer, Gimel Rishonos, it is not talking about Keser Chachma Bina. It's talking about Chesed Gevurah Tiferes. They're called Gimel Rishonos, often abbreviated Gimel Reish. You'll see in the, if you look at the commentary of the Gra to Mishlei, he will often talk about Gimel Reish, the Gimel Rishonos. Now we know that the human personification of the Midah of Chesed is said to be Avram Avinu. Because Avram Avinu devoted his life, his primary Avodas Hashem was the loving kindness that he showed everybody, even the unworthy of Sodom. And indeed, it's important to understand that this stems from the fact that this was the primary way that he identified God. You see, the way he served Hashem was the way he saw Hashem, and therefore he served Hashem by emulating Hashem. And the primary aspect of God that Avraham Avinu saw was benevolence and compassion and kindness in the world. In fact, many say that that's why the Nisayon, the trial of the Akedah, even though it was Akedas Yitzchak was the one whose life was on the line, but it is not called a trial of Yitzchak. It is called a trial of Avraham. Now, why is it called a trial of Avraham? I mean, Yitzchak also had to give up quite a lot. So one of the interpretations is that since Yitzchak served God through inner strength and Devorah and the powers of judgment, so for him to give his life for Hashem was consistent with his nature. It was consistent with the fact that he saw God as the powerful God to whom he must submit. So as a result, as difficult as it is to give your life, it was his nature to do so. But Avraham Avinu, whose whole perception of Hashem was based on kindness and mercy, this really shook him up, because this was something that the God of mercy and the God of love is commanding him to do something that is exactly the opposite. And that's why it's a great, great nisayon. If I believe in God because I perceive God as merciful, kind, compassionate, benevolent, then what's going to keep me in God's worship when I see God as vindictive and cruel and arbitrary and capricious? And that's where his faith came in. That's why it says, that's why after the Akedah, Hashem says to Avraham, now I see that you have reverence for me. Meaning, until the Akedah, I knew that you loved me because you saw in me love. But the Yira was the foundation which allowed Avraham to go forward, even when Hashem was commanding him to do things that were inconsistent. I mean, it turned out not to be inconsistent, because Hashem said, I never meant for you to kill Yitzchak, but at least initially, it appeared to be inconsistent. So, Avraham represents Chesed, Yitzchak represents Devorah, inner strength, discipline, conquering the Yetzer Hara, submission to God. Now we know that each of these spheros, when taken to an extreme, can be destructive. Too much Chesed, you produce a Yishmael. Too much Devorah, you produce an Esav. And again, think about it in terms of a parent, right? You let your kid do whatever your kid wants. He becomes spoiled, decadent, and undisciplined. You're too tough on your child with rules and regulations and straitjacketing. The child will become rebellious and feel abused. Right? So Chesed is necessary and Devorah is necessary. But when taken to an extreme, it will have kilkulim. So the third sphera, Tiferes, beauty, is said to be the synthesis between Chesed and Devorah. The optimal combination, the balance, the integration, the harmonization of Chesed and Devorah. And this was realized in the personality of Yakov Avinu. And although Yakov Avinu's children had their own issues with Mechiras Yosef, but every one of them is part of the Jewish people. There is no psolos, there is no refuse, there is no rejection. Yakov Avinu is said to be mitaso shalema. All of his progeny are part of the Jewish people, because Yaakov Avinu took the midah of Chesed and Devorah and was able to concretize it in Tiferes, right? So Tiferes is beauty, and beauty, in fact, even in terms of aesthetics, this is the definition of beauty, is the ability to synthesize and integrate disparate and discordant elements to bring them together in a harmonization. This is Tiferes. So now, keep in mind the different names that Tiferes is called. It is called Tiferes, which is beauty. It is also called Emes, which is truth. Because truth will not be one extreme or another. Truth will be the harmonization of ideas that exist in contradiction and in tension. Because Hashem is infinite, the Torah is infinite. By definition, we grasp only bits and pieces of things. And as a result, a person has a shita and says, anyone that doesn't have my shita is an apikoros. And the other guy says the same thing. But in reality, everybody has a partial truth. I've given this mashal, I think, many times already. It's a children's fairy tale or a story about 7 blind men and the elephant, in which 7 blind people were asked to feel an elephant and describe what they think an elephant looks like. So one person felt the elephant's trunk and said, an elephant is a long eel. And another person felt the elephant's ears and says, the elephant is a gigantic butterfly. And another person felt the elephant's legs. The elephant is like a tall date palm tree. And another person felt around the stomach or whatever, it says, the elephant is like a hippopotamus or whatever it would be. Now, all of them were right and all of them were wrong. All of them were right because each one was describing a partial truth. But the truth was greater than the sum of the individual parts, right? So everybody has only part of a picture. That's very true in Torah as well. People have partial pictures that they think is the complete picture, when in fact the complete picture is a harmonization of often opposite elements. So to take, and you often find this by very, very great Gedolim, that you try to summarize their thoughts with a soundbite or, Rav Kook was a Zionist, right, a pre-state Zionist. Well, Rav Kook also wrote quite a lot, maybe this is not the time to bring this up, about Arab rights, in a Jewish country. Rav Kook spoke about the exceptional holiness of the Jewish people. Of course he did. But Rav Kook also talked about the notion that every human being is in the image of God, right? In other words, the point basically is that it's the 7 blind men and the elephant. Each person sees a particular aspect. Some see Rav Kook as the Zionist. Others see him as the human rights universalist, right? And all of them are true because he combined all of those different things. Was Rav Soloveitchik a great Talmid Chacham or was he a philosopher? Well, the answer is he was both, right? But different people will see different things, right? Okay, so Tiferes, beauty, is the same as truth in a sense, because beauty is the ability to harmonize opposite forces into a harmonious balance. And that is what truth is. Truth is not one extreme or the other extreme. Now that does mean that truth is a little bit more confusing because it is much easier to have kind of a single idea that dominates you. Because then you have a single thing that's your banner, that's your flag. And again, and for many, many people, maybe most people, practically that's how they have to live their life. They have to have like a central ideological core. I hope I'm not being too abstract today. But a central ideological core, that's their banner. My team, my uniform. I get it. I do get it. Of course I get it. But in reality, by definition, there's going to be a certain amount of distortion, even though it may be a necessary practicality in life to kind of have your banner. But by definition, there's something that's going to be missing there because it is not encompassing a broader truth, right? So beauty, truth. HaRav points out that is why Torah itself is called Tiferes. Torah itself is called Tiferes. In fact, the HaRav's famous sefer on Matan Torah. HaRav wrote a great sefer on Matan Torah. It's called Tiferes Yisrael, the beauty of Yisrael. And the Maharal even points out an interesting Gemara in Masechah Shabbos, where the Gemara Masechah Shabbos points out that many aspects of Matan Torah are connected to the number 3. So the Torah was given to a threefold nation. The Gemara makes the observation. Threefold nation, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim. It was given in the 3rd month from Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. It was given after 3 days of preparation. Meaning the Gemara makes an observation, and it's a threefold Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim. So just like many aspects of Pesach are connected to 4, many aspects of Matan Torah are connected to 3. Now the Gemara doesn't go anywhere with this observation. It just makes the observation, blessed is Hashem that gave us a threefold Torah to a threefold nation in the 3rd month after 3 days of preparation. Okay, but what's the point? What's the particular significance of Matan Torah being connected with 3? So the Maharal says, because if you symbolically envision 3 in the shape of a triangle, you will see that at the base of the triangle, the 2 extremities are in opposite directions, here, here. But they meet and they synthesize at the apex of the triangle. Right? You can draw 2 diagonal, how do you form a triangle? Right? You have a straight horizontal line, and then you have 2 diagonal lines from the extremities of the base, and the diagonal lines meet at the top, right? They're just the triangle. So the Maharal says, what is that doing? That's taking opposites and synthesizing them. And the Torah itself is a synthesis of opposites in at least 2 ways. Number 1, it is a synthesis between Ruchnius and Gashmius, because we are a body and a soul. And our soul wants to have closeness to God. And yet we also have a body that craves comfort and ease and pleasure. And we're living in a constant state of conflict and tension between the demands of my Gashmiya self and the true essence of my soul that yearns to be connected to God. But the Torah creates a synthesis and a harmonization by showing you how even the needs of your body can be elevated in Avodas Hashem. So you eat with brachos, and you eat l'shem for the honor of Shabbos, or you eat in order to have strength to learn, or you sleep. So at that point, instead of the physical being in opposition to the spiritual, the physical itself now becomes in the service of the spiritual. That's a harmonization, the harmonization of body and soul. And the Maharal points out, based on Kabbalah, this is an old debate. The Maharal never refers to Kabbalah, and the Maharal's vocabulary is not a Cabalistic vocabulary. It's a philosophical vocabulary. Ad kedei kach that even the sons of the Maharal say, people accuse our father of Kabbalah, chas v'shalom. That particular time you weren't supposed to learn Kabbalah. Chas v'shalom, he had nothing to do with Kabbalah, but again, I with very, very great respect for the great sons of the Maharal, this was obviously a cover-up. Anyone knows that the Maharal is absolutely speaking Kabbalistic truths, but he's doing so in a non-Kabbalistic vocabulary, similar to what the Ramchal had to do in Mesilas Yesharim and the like. And that's why the Maharal is constantly dropping things like, this is a sod, this is a sod, this is a sod, this is a sod. Those are code words for, this is based on Kabbalah and the like. So based on this idea, the Maharal says Torah is connected to 3 because it harmonizes body and soul, and it also harmonizes Chesed and Devorah because the Torah shows me when should I be merciful, when do I need to be strict. As the Torah gives me the guideline of striking that balance. Otherwise, if I would just go with my own inclination, I might be too kind and giving when that's not appropriate. Sure, let's have a nice ceasefire in Gaza, let Hamas go home and everybody will be nice, which would be kind of stupid. Or the other way around, too much Gevurah, in which I don't have any type of rachamim at all. The Torah gives me the right balance between Chesed and Gevurah, right? So again, B'kitzer, this is kind of a long digression in understanding that the midah of Yakov is Tiferes, and Tiferes is connected to Torah, and it is also connected to Emes, because Emes consists of striking the appropriate balance, at least in the Cabalistic context, between Chesed and Devorah. So, here is the thing. Going back to the pasuk, Titen Emes liYakov. Now, here we might think the following: Hashem deals with the Yakov Jews. So, Yakov Jews mean the average. Again, going with the idea, the average good Jew, who's not necessarily exceptional in his righteousness, but he tries to do the right thing. So, God will deal with the average good Jew with a midah that is called Emes. Now, here is where you get into a little semantic confusion. And the Ramak defines Emes in a Cabalistic way, which is not a standard way. We normally think Emes refers to kind of an objective standard of justice, meaning, I'll give you what you deserve. And we look at Emes as a contradiction to Rachamim. Right? In other words, somebody has, Averos, and they stand before the judge. So the judge can either follow the truth and punish him, or the judge can bend the truth and have mercy on him. So we don't look at Emes as a midah of Rachamim in any sense. Emes is the opposite of Rachamim. Emes is you get what you deserve, without mercy. And yet, not only is Emes enumerated in the 10th midah of the Yud Gimel midas of Micha, but let's go back to the Torah itself. In the Yud Gimel midas of Moshe that Hashem taught Moshe after the Ched HaEgel. So what does it say? Rav Chesed, God is abundant in loving kindness, v'emes, and truth. Truth in the Torah itself is counted as a midah of Rachamim. So it's a very simple question. In what way is truth a midah of Rachamim? Truth means you get what our normal definition would be you get what you deserve. So the Ramak is masber. That's not what we mean by truth. Truth does not mean you get what you deserve. If that's what it means, it wouldn't be Rachamim. Rather, truth is striking the balance between Chesed and Devorah, so that the Devorah is indeed modified by Chesed, but the Chesed is not legamri free, it'll be constrained a little bit by Devorah. Now, this might be a non-standard definition of Emes, but it's a definition of Emes based on the Sfiros of Chesed, Devorah, Tiferes. And that is why yet another term for Tiferes. Right? We mentioned Tiferes is beauty. Tiferes is Emes. Tiferes is Torah. Tiferes is also called Rachamim. And again, these are Lav Dafka dictionary definitions. But in the Cabalistic lexicon, Rachamim and Chesed are not synonyms. Chesed is unrestrained benevolence. Rachamim is benevolence that is balanced with a certain amount of Devorah. So that's why Tiferes is Rachamim. So, Titen Emes liYakov, the Ramak says, is essentially a midah keneged midah. If you live your life as a Yakov, and by Yakov we mean that you balance your kindness with appropriate Devorah, and you treat people with Rachamim, but you don't go overboard. You do hold them to a certain level of accountability, then God will treat you that way as well, which is a great thing. Meaning I treat people with Rachamim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu treats me with rachamim. So that's Titen Emes LeYakov. You, Hashem, show the midah of Emes to the Yakovs of the world. So the Yakovs of the world, again, we're going to the Cabalistic idea, are those who synthesize Chesed and Devorah to achieve a Tiferes. Hashem will be noeg with you in the midah of synthesizing Chesed and Devorah for Tiferes, which is Rachamim. But then there's a higher level. There are Yaakov people, and then there are Avraham people. Avraham people show the midah of Chesed even to the unworthy. Meaning to say they go beyond what would normally be expected. They show Chesed, so Hashem will show them Chesed, even if Emes would not save them. They will be saved by Chesed. So you see the interpretation here. Again, it goes back to the idea of emulating Hashem, and Hashem emulating us, really, and that is Titen Emes LeYakov. If I am a Yakov person who deals with people still with Rachamim, but I bring in the Shuras Hadin of Gevurah, then Hashem will deal with me with that midah of Emes, which is still a wonderful thing. That is a good thing. But if I could manage to go beyond the Yakov and become an Avraham person, then I will be Zaycha to the Madrega of Chesed LeAvraham. Hashem will show me Chesed, even if the midah of Emes would not justify my being saved or my getting a bracha, but by being an Avraham person who deals with other people that way, Hashem will help me as well. Yeah.
Shouldn't it be the other way around? The Emes is what's desired, and the Chesed is because it's unearned. It wouldn't be good. Is Shaul and Melech? Would he be treated with kindness because of what he did with Amalek?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because after all, in the Kabbalistic structure itself, we talked about Tiferes as being the balancing between Chesed and Gevurah, which reaches a higher level of perfection, right? Because we talk about Chesed, you have Yishmael. Thank you. Gevurah, you have Esav. And it's only Yaakov who appropriately synthesizes them into the midah of Emes that we achieve a shleimus. And, your example is a good example as well, in which Shaul, who applied Chesed to a situation of Amalek, of sparing the king of Amalek, that was a tremendous sin that resulted in eventually the Haman being born, and the whole Jewish people almost got destroyed because of Shaul's rachamim. So, in a sense, you're raising a very good question. Why would we be encouraging you to move backwards in a spiritual development? Because if the highest level of spiritual development is the appropriate synthesis between Chesed and Gevurah to achieve what the Mekubalim called Rachamim, right? Because that's the midah of Yaakov Avinu, and that's the midah of the Torah itself. Then why are we telling you to go backwards to reclaim that pure midah of Chesed, even to the undeserving and even to the unworthy, and somehow that will trigger a greater Chesed? I was going to say greater Rachamim, but I think that's confusing at this point. But we say greater Rachamim, that's how we would talk normally, to come down. I mean, l'chayra, you're moving backwards, because it's Hashem's goal, l'chayra, that we do have an appropriate synthesis between Chesed and Gevurah, which is called Tiferes and Rachamim. Yeah, I mean, that actually is a very, very excellent point. All I can say is that obviously the Ramak is referring to going to an extreme when it is not contravening a mandate of the Torah itself, meaning to say in the case of Shaul, the Torah already directed him as to what is the appropriate behavior, so he cannot be a bigger tzaddik than the Torah. The Torah says eradicate Amalek. Shaul cannot use Chesed as a consideration. But the Ramak is suggesting that where the Torah doesn't prohibit, then a chesed stance might be in some cases, an example of going lifnim mishuras hadin, beyond the letter of the law. So, therefore, the concept would be this: if I behave as a Yakov person with rachamim, then Hashem will show me rachamim. If I behave as an Avraham person with pure chesed, even when rachamim would not suffice, because the person is very unworthy, then Hashem will show me chesed even when I'm totally unworthy. And again, this goes back to b'derech she'adam reitzeh leilech, the pathway that a person wants to go, molichan oso. All right, this is the pathway that Hashem will lead me. Now, here though, the Ramak adds an interesting point that, and this goes back to the emulation idea, and that is, if God behaves towards the Yakovs with Emes, and God behaves towards the Avrahams with Emes, that has two messages for you, two different messages for you. Message number one is, if you are a Yakov person, you'll get Emes. If you're an Avraham person, you'll get Chesed, right? That's message number one. But there's a message number two that's a bit more subtle. And that is, part of your imitating God is that this is how you should behave towards Yaakov people or Avraham people. Which, okay, actually, truth, I see this as a little contradictory to principle one, but let me illustrate what he says. He says that even though to a regular Jew, you should behave with rachamim. But if a Jew is an Avraham Jew, even if he did a lot of bad things to you, you should overlook it and behave with that person as chesed. You see the subtlety? In other words, there are two different points here, and I have to admit I see a little bit of a contradiction. Let me go over this. There are two different points of what's my emulation duty here. The first point is, if I behave as a Yaakov Jew, then God will show me Emes. If I behave as an Avraham Jew, then God will show me Chesed. And I might need Chesed sometimes. Sometimes I might need Chesed because even with Emes and Rachamim, I may not cut it. Now, that alone would seem to indicate that it's better for me to be an Avraham Jew towards everybody. Because if I'm an Avraham Jew towards everybody, then I get Hashem's chesed. But confusingly, and I'm not so clear here, confusingly, the Ramak then makes another point. And he says, since Hashem shows the Yakov Jews Emes, so you should show the Yakov Jews Emes, meaning even if somebody wronged me, I should still combine Rachamim, or combine Chesed and Devorah to have Rachamim. But I can still have some Devorah there. But Lagabe, an Avraham Jew, I should be Noiheg b'Chesed Gomer. But do you see my problem? My problem here is that if God treats the Avram Jew with Chesed Gomer, then I should be an Avram Jew even towards the Yakovs. Because that's how I become an Avram Jew to merit Hashem's Chesed.
Exactly, the Ramak feels that treating the Yakov Jews with Emes is the most Hasidic thing to do.
Okay, I mean, I hear, because that's what God does. I mean, if in other words, you don't have to be better than God, right? God treats the Yakov Jews with rachamim. Your achrayus is to treat the Yakov Jews with rachamim, And then you will be treated by God with rachamim. But what do the Avram Jews do? The Avram Jews are treating the Yakov Jews with chesed. So if I want to get the chesed of Avram, shouldn't I treat the Yakov Jews with chesed? Right, so I've been thinking about this for a lot. I don't have a good Egypt. I mean, there seems to be some difficulties here. Unless the Ramak is not creating... In other words, the Ramak may not be saying you should treat the Yakov Jews. In other words, he might be saying this. Even if you are treating the Yakov Jews with Emes, but the Avram Jews you must treat b'chesed. Meaning he's not saying you must treat the Yakov Jews with rachamim, with chesed, but he's saying even if your netiya, your teva, is to combine rachamim, is to combine chesed and gevura, but vis-a-vis the Avraham Jews, you have to have a pure yichus of chesed. That could be how you understand it. Yeah.
So one thing on that is like maybe you have like a third category of Jew who's not fit to live up to either the standard of truth or kindness, and you treat that one with kindness. Or maybe like every person is usually not fully Avram or not fully Emes, they're a mix of the two. So you should come to them and where they want to be treated with truth. Because it's not just stam good to be treated with chesed, because it removes some of the opportunity on your part to benefit from the justice, right? Because we said that if someone suffers, it's actually like a tikkun for them. So it might be that they do lose somewhat out if they're always dealt with chesed. So it's not just...
So, I hear that. In other words, one can certainly make the argument that, pure chesed is sometimes bad for a person. It's bad for a child. It's bad for an adult. That you have to... Rachamim, where you combine the chesed and the gevura, gives a person accountability. It gives a person responsibility. It's ma'orer them to tshuva. All of that is true. But my question, therefore, is this. If all of that is true, then even towards the Avraham person, I should give him the benefit of the rachamim rather than the chesed.
But a person isn't always able to live up to truth. It's not always the good thing for them, because in some domains, they're not going to be able to manage it, and they'll need the chesed there.
Yeah, but is that a function of there being an Avraham person or a Yakov person? I mean, that's going to be a difficulty that anybody might have. Unless what you're saying is maybe a more sophisticated argument, that even in the realm of pure chesed, okay, that's already a different... In other words, there is a gevura that's a modification of chesed, but then there's a gevura that is built into the chesed itself. Meaning to say, sometimes pure chesed will contain with it a gevura, because the chesed without the gevura would be destructive. Meaning, there's a difference between saying there's chesed and gevura, and I'm synthesizing it, and saying there's a gevura within the chesed that has to come out. And indeed, in terms of vocabulary, there is such a musik. There's something called gevura sheba chesed, the gevura that is within the chesed itself. Okay, so these two midas we looked at together, Titen, Emes, Yakov, chesed, Avraham, and the difference between Emes, which is also rachamim, and chesed, and the notion that Emes in this non-standard definition does not refer to objective truth. It refers to the balance and harmonization of opposite tendencies to achieve a truer spiritual result. Okay, we'll come back to this, but for now I just wanted to cover basically number 10 and 11. I'm sorry, this is number 10 and 11. Yes, that's correct, yeah. Now, just very quickly, I just mentioned very quickly, but we'll go over it in more detail. We have 12 and 13. You have given Emes to Yakov, Chesed to Avram, and then it says, Asher nishpata l'avosenu, that you have sworn to our forefathers. That's number 12. Mimei kedem, from the days of old, from ancient times. So here the Ramak says that this picks up the idea that even if all mechanisms fail Rachamim is not going to help us, and even Chesed has its limits. At some point, a person may be so undeserving that even the midah of Chesed cannot rescue him, but there's always a final card in the deck, and that is the covenant that God made with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yakov. And that's called Zechus Avos. Well, it's called, actually it has two names, and they're slightly different. There's the covenant of the Avos, and there's the Zechus, the merit of the Avos. And that remains every single day, 3 times a day in the Shemona Esrei. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yakov. Zocher Chaste Avos. You remember the kindness of our Avos. Umevi Goyel Livnei V'neihem. And you bring redemption to their descendants. L'man Shemo, for the glory of God, B'ava, with love. Zechus Avos. No matter how unworthy we are, there is a Zechus Avos. So says the Ramak. This is a midah of rachamim that even, I'm using rachamim in a general sense, that even when all else fails, asher nishpata labeseinu, there is that shvuah. So says the Ramak, once again, I have a guy that's a real bum. He's doing all sorts of bad things. But, number one, he's a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yakov. God remembers the covenant of the Avos. I should remember that as well. And then it's lav dafka the Avos. It may be that his father or his grandfather, in his own individual family line. He says, listen, the guy's a bum, but his grandfather was such a great, great man. And I will show this man love because of his grandfather and the like. So the Ramak says this is once again a strategy that when I am dealing with difficult people, I remember the zechus of Avos, both Avram, Yitzchak, and Yakov generally, and I remember, if that happens to be the case, his individual zechus Avos. That's going to be relevant. So this is more of a psychological way that you could be ma'orer within your heart, mercy and compassion and forgiveness towards difficult people by kind of remembering their zechus Avos and the like. And the last one, we'll go over it more bi'arichas, mimei kedem, is the idea, very interesting, of setting back the clock. Meaning, as bad as a person was, there must have been a time in his life that he was a cute little baby. When he was 5. What was this guy when he was 5? Well, maybe even when he was 5, he was full of trouble. Okay, 4, 3, 2, 1, 6 months. Set the clock back. Imagine the person as a child. Imagine the person as a laughing, happy child, in which there was innocence, in which there was joy. Reset. Turn the clock back. And then the Ramak says, when you see the difference between that child and this adult, instead of being filled with anger and resentment, you will have compassion and pity for what on earth happened to make the person that was made. So mimei kedem, right? So the last two is asher nishba lavos. These are mechanisms to help you deal with difficult people. One is to remember zechus avos, and the other is to imagine, maybe not remember, but to imagine mimei kedem, the olden days, meaning of this person's life. Was there ever a point at which this person was a nice person? Now, there may be cases where that never happened, but that's going to be rare, actually. And again, this is an issue, I'll tell you, that actually helps people dealing with parents sometimes. Parents, people have difficulty with their parents, but you go back and you understand the difficult experiences that your family members had. Holocaust or whatever it was. And then you say, that affected them. And as the saying goes, hurt people hurt. People who have been hurt will sometimes hurt others. And then fakert, the Ramak says, instead of anger, you will have rachamim. You'll actually have rachamim. And then you'll even say, with all they've been through, look at the, good job they did, afal piche. No, it's not perfect, but what would have happened if I would have had to go through that, right? So that's the last midah of mimei kedem. Try to reset, try to move them to a place, move the person in your imagination back to a place when they were children, when they were babies, and then try to understand what happened to create these difficulties. And that's ma'ira rachamim in a person, okay?
Thank you for listening to this Awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.